The winding asphalt ribbon, choked with ancient pine and oak, surrendered abruptly to a gravel path, spitting dust into the late afternoon sun. Elara Vance gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white. For the past 2 hours, the only signs of civilization had been faded, "Vote here," signs nailed to tree trunks and the occasional rusted mailbox listing precariously on a weathered post. Now, a hand-painted wooden sign, weathered and chipped, leaned against a moss-covered boulder. "Welcome to Oakhaven. Population unknown." Elara allowed a tight, humorless smile. Unknown. That was the first clue, wasn't it? As an urban historian, specializing in forgotten communities and lost folklore, Oakhaven, West Virginia, was a goldmine. Her university grant had been approved with surprising ease, a testament to the sheer obscurity of this place. She was here to meticulously document the town's history, its vanishing traditions, and, she hoped, finally understand the persistent, unsettling rumors that clung to its name like the mountain mist. Her sensible sedan, packed with research materials and a week's worth of non-perishable food, bounced along the rough track, the drone of her tires the only sound besides the distant, almost mournful call of a bird. The air grew heavier as she descended into a valley, the tall, ancient trees forming a canopy so thick it felt like twilight even in the middle of the day. Then, through a break in the foliage, Oakhaven appeared. It wasn't the ghost town she half expected, nor a bustling village. It was a scattering of humble, aged wooden houses, some with smoke curling lazily from chimneys, others appearing long abandoned, their windows like vacant eyes. A small, whitewashed church stood on a slight rise, its steeple piercing the tree line, but its bell tower seemed strangely silent, devoid of any bell. A general store, its paint peeled and faded, served as the town's apparent hub, a single rusted pickup truck parked haphazardly out front. No other cars were visible. It was a snapshot from another century, a place forgotten by time, swallowed by the whispering mountains. Elara pulled up to the general store, its wooden porch creaking under the weight of her boots. A faded sign above the door read, "McGregor's Provisions and Sundries." The air here felt different, thick, earthy, and carrying a faint, peculiar scent she couldn't quite place, like damp earth mixed with something else, something animal or vegetal, but darker. As the screen door groaned open, a bell above it jingled, announcing her presence to the cavernous, dimly lit interior. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of sunlight piercing a grimy window. Shelves were sparsely stocked with canned goods, basic supplies, and hand-stitched quilts. Behind a wooden counter, a man with a thick, wiry beard and eyes that seemed to have seen too much peered over a worn newspaper. He looked up slowly, his gaze unblinking and unnervingly direct. "Well, now," he drawled, his voice like gravel, "don't see many new faces round here, especially not city folk." Elara offered a polite, practiced smile. "Good afternoon. My name is Elara Vance. I'm a historian from West Virginia University. I called ahead about reserving the old preacher's cabin for a week." The man, presumably, McGregor, slowly nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "Heard you were coming. Cabin's ready. Keys on the hook by the register." He pointed with a gnarled finger. "Folks around here, they don't much care for outsiders poking round, mind, but you're welcome enough, long as you respect our ways." His words, though not overtly threatening, carried an undertone that settled in Elara's stomach like a cold stone. "I understand," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "My research is purely academic. I'm interested in Oakhaven's unique history and folklore." McGregor let out a low, guttural chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Folklore, eh? Plenty of that. Some truths best left buried, though." He paused, his gaze drifting to a shelf of small, crudely carved wooden figurines. Animalistic shapes, some vaguely humanoid, adorned with dried flowers and feathers. They looked primitive, unsettling. "You'll be wanting provisions, I reckon?" he asked, abruptly changing the subject. Ilara quickly bought a few essentials, keenly aware of his eyes following her every move. She paid him, the exchange oddly silent. As she turned to leave, a woman emerged from the back, her face deeply lined, her hair a wild silver tangle. Her eyes, startlingly blue, fixed on Ilara. "A new one," the woman murmured, her voice raspy like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "The mountains always take their toll." Ilara's breath hitched. She forced a smile. "Just visiting for research." The woman's gaze seemed to pierce through her, an ancient knowledge reflected in their depths. "The old ways are strong here, child. Stronger than your books can tell. Listen to the wind, Ilara Vance. It whispers secrets." Ilara thanked them both, feeling a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. As she stepped back out into the fading sunlight, the bell jingled behind her, a faint metallic groan. The air felt colder now, despite the sun still high in the sky. She found the preacher's cabin easily enough, a small, solitary structure at the edge of the woods, a short distance from the main cluster of homes. It was weathered but sturdy, its porch overlooking a dense wall of trees. Inside, it was Spartan. A narrow bed, a table, a small fireplace. A faint, earthy scent lingered, similar to the one at the general store, but stronger. As she began to unpack her bags, the sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows through the cabin's single window. The sounds of the forest intensified. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and a new, unsettling sound. A low, resonant thrum, like something ancient and vast vibrating deep within the earth, or perhaps within the very heart of these unforgiving mountains. Ilara tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as natural, but a cold dread began to coil in her stomach. Oakhaven was more than just a forgotten town. It held a breath that was both ancient and deeply, terrifyingly alive, and she had just stepped into its lungs. The first night in Oakhaven had been a restless one for Ilara. The low thrumming she'd heard outside the cabin seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, a primal pulse that resonated with her growing unease. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the ancient wood, sounded magnified in the profound silence of the mountains. By morning, though exhausted, her resolve to uncover Oakhaven's secrets was stronger than ever. She spent the better part of the day poring over her notes, cross-referencing the sparse historical records she'd brought with her against the vague local accounts she'd gleaned online. The common thread was a consistent pattern of unexplained disappearances, particularly around harvest season, always attributed by local authorities to mountain accidents or wandering off. Too many for coincidence, Ilara thought. She ventured back into the town, drawn by the dilapidated structure she'd noted earlier, a building that once served as the town hall and, judging by the faint hand-painted sign above a boarded-up window, possibly a library. The door was unlocked, a thick layer of dust clinging to the latch. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, reeking of mildew and forgotten paper. Shelves were filled not with books, but with overflowing boxes, haphazardly stacked. This was where Oakhaven's past resided, if anywhere. Hours dissolved as Ilara meticulously sifted through the debris of local history. She found ledgers recording births and deaths, some dating back to the late 1700s, but with disconcerting gaps. Entire families, generations even, seemed to vanish from the records. No deaths, no relocations, just an abrupt cessation of entries. Then, tucked beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers, she found it. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, the handwriting a spidery, almost illegible scrawl. It appeared to be a personal diary, detailing the life of a woman, named Silas Vance, dating from the mid-1800s. Ilara froze. Vance, her own surname. A coincidence? Or something more? The journal wasn't a narrative. It was a fragmented collection of observations and increasingly frantic ramblings. Silas wrote of the calling from the deep woods, of the changing of the seasons and the hungry earth, and cryptic references to the old ones do. There were sketches, too, rudimentary but disturbing, stick figures bowing before a grotesque horned silhouette and intricate geometric patterns that resembled no known symbols. The blood sustains. One entry chillingly read, "The pact binds us." The words sent a cold shiver down Alara's spine. This was no ordinary folklore. This was a testament to something ancient and malevolent. As Alara continued her research, she became acutely aware of the townspeople's watchful eyes. At McGregor's store, conversations ceased abruptly when she entered. Children playing in dusty yards would stop and stare with unnerving stillness. Even the few times she saw someone on the road, they would quickly avert their gaze, pulling their hats lower or duck into a doorway. The subtle hostility was palpable, a silent agreement among the residents that she was an unwelcome intruder. One afternoon, while sketching the church from a distance, an elderly woman, her face a web of wrinkles, approached her. "Still digging up what ain't meant to be dug, child?" she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. Alara tried to be cordial. "Just appreciating the local architecture. It's quite unique." The woman let out a dry cough. "Some things are built not to be admired but to contain, or to offer." Her eyes, clouded with age, held a disturbing glint as she added, "The mountain has its eyes everywhere, and its hunger is endless." She then turned and shuffled away, leaving Alara with a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The unsettling. Events began to escalate. One morning, Alara woke to find a small, crudely carved wooden figurine, identical to those she'd seen in McGregor's store, placed carefully on her cabin porch. It was an animalistic shape, its head adorned with tiny, dried red berries that looked disturbingly like droplets of blood. It hadn't been there when she went to bed. Her cabin, she realized with a jolt, had no proper lock, just a simple latch. Anyone could have placed it there. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. Was this a warning? A threat? She carefully picked it up, feeling a strange, cold energy emanating from the wood. Later that day, while transcribing Silas Vance's journal entries, her laptop screen flickered violently, then displayed a series of distorted, rapidly shifting symbols that bore an uncanny resemblance to the patterns in Silas's drawings. The cabin's interior grew frigid, and the low thrumming returned, louder now, accompanied by a faint guttural chanting that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath her feet. Alara snatched her laptop, her hands shaking, and slammed it shut, the chilling sound instantly vanishing. She tried to rationalize it. Faulty wiring, a bad connection, the mountain air playing tricks, but the primitive thrumming, the sudden cold, and the terrifying symbols burned into her mind. Oakhaven wasn't just a place with dark history. It was a place where that history was still alive, whispering through the trees, pulsating beneath the soil, and actively resisting her intrusion. The more she dug, the deeper she sank into its cold, unforgiving embrace. The wooden figurine on, her porch, the flickering laptop screen, the guttural chanting, these weren't mere coincidences or the product of an overactive imagination. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that Oakhaven was actively pushing back. Her research, particularly Silas Vance's cryptic journal, had become a dangerous intrusion. She spent the next day mostly confined to her cabin, the sense of being watched now a tangible weight on her shoulders. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every distant sound in the woods felt like a deliberate approach. The low thrumming from the earth had become almost constant, a dull ache behind her ears, and the peculiar earthy scent, once faint, now permeated the very air she breathed inside the cabin. She tried to dismiss it, to focus on the journal, but the words blurred, and the crude sketches of horned figures seemed to writhe on the page. She knew she needed more, something undeniable, something that would explain the disappearances and the terrifying entries. Her gaze kept drifting to the old, silent church on the hill, It was the only building she hadn't thoroughly investigated, its austere facade somehow more intimidating than the derelict town hall. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Ilara made a decision. She couldn't stay holed up, waiting for whatever Oakhaven had in store. She needed answers. Armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, she walked towards the church, the gravel crunching loudly under her boots in the unnatural silence. The air grew colder with each step, the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cloying, growing stronger. The church door, surprisingly, was unlocked, creaking inward with a mournful groan. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the same peculiar scent. Rows of simple wooden pews faced a plain altar, devoid of any religious iconography she recognized. No cross, no statues, just a rough-hewn stone block at the center. As her flashlight beam swept across the walls, she noticed faint, faded markings. Beneath layers of peeling paint, geometric patterns similar to those in Silas Vance's journal, but larger, more intricate. They seemed to pulse in the dim light, almost alive. Suddenly, the church door slammed shut behind her with a resounding thud, plunging the interior into near-total darkness, save for the narrow beam of her flashlight. A collective gasp, a rustle of movement, and then, from the shadows, figures emerged. They were the townspeople. McGregor, the old woman from the store, faces she recognized from her brief excursions, and many more she hadn't seen before, their eyes gleaming in the gloom. They didn't speak, but their silence was far more menacing than any shout. They simply stood, forming a semicircle, slowly closing in. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. McGregor stepped forward, his eyes devoid of warmth. "You came looking for truths, girl, and truths, they have a way of finding you." The old woman from the store, her face, a mask of grim determination, added, "The mountain demands its due. Always has, always will." Ilara backed away, her foot catching on something. She stumbled, her flashlight beam swinging wildly, illuminating a section of the floor near the altar. There, partially hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was a small, ornate wooden box. It wasn't the crude, animalistic carving she'd seen before. This was finely crafted, almost elegant, but adorned with the same unsettling geometric symbols. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. As if on cue, the townspeople began to chant, a low, guttural hum that slowly rose in intensity, the same thrumming she'd heard from the earth. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Ilara, driven by a desperate curiosity, ignored the encroaching figures and fumbled with the box. It wasn't locked. She lifted the lid, and a wave of ancient cold energy washed over her, making her teeth ache. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried dark leaves, was a single, shriveled, blackened heart. It was clearly human, but impossibly preserved, its surface covered in the same intricate pulsing symbols that adorned the church walls and Silas Vance's journal. A horrifying realization slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just folklore, it was a living, breathing, terrifying tradition. The disappearances weren't accidents. They were sacrifices. The old one's due wasn't a metaphor. It was real, and the pact that bound them was a blood pact, renewed with every harvest, with every vanished soul. As the chanting intensified, the symbols on the walls began to glow with a faint, malevolent red light. The air grew impossibly cold, and a formless shadow began to coalesce behind the altar, growing in size, its outline vaguely horned, impossibly ancient. It was the entity, the old one, drawn by the ritual, by the presence of its heart, and by the fresh intrusion. Ilara stumbled backward, dropping the box, the shriveled heart thudding sickeningly on the floor. Her mind reeled, trying to process the horrifying truth. The townspeople weren't just protecting a secret. They were its devoted servants, their lives bound to this monstrous entity, and she, by uncovering their darkest truth, had become the next offering. McGregor's face, now contorted in a terrifying, almost ecstatic grimace, moved closer. "The mountain has chosen Elara Vance," he rasped, his voice no longer gravelly but imbued with a chilling, resonant power. "And its hunger is endless." The shadowy form behind the altar swelled, its presence filling the small church, pressing down on Elara, suffocating her with ancient dread. Her life was no longer just in peril, it was already forfeit. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless, trapped, and utterly terrified in the heart of Oakhaven's dark, living secret. The horrifying truth of Oakhaven, embodied by the shriveled heart and the growing shadow of the Old One, paralyzed Elara for only a terrifying second. Then a primal instinct for survival surged through her. McGregor and the townspeople, their faces contorted in a zealous fervor, advanced, their chanting now a deafening roar that vibrated through her very bones. The air crackled with a dark energy, the ancient symbols on the walls pulsing with an angry red light that painted their grim faces. The shadowy entity behind the altar, now towering and vaguely defined by an oppressive mass of pure malice, stretched an ethereal limb towards her, its form seemingly coalescing from the very dread it invoked. Elara screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was swallowed by the clamor. She didn't think, she reacted. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. The main door was blocked by the mass of chanting villagers. She spotted a small, dark opening. To the side of the altar, barely visible behind the growing shadow of the entity. Perhaps a sacristy or a hidden passage. It was her only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, Elara bolted, not towards the door, but towards the altar, a desperate gamble. The townspeople lunged, their hands grasping, but her small frame, fueled by terror, was surprisingly agile. She dodged McGregor's outstretched arm, felt a rough hand tear at her jacket, but kept moving. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a maddening symphony of devotion and menace. As she neared the altar, the shadowy entity reared back, a silent, cosmic shriek emanating from its form as if her defiance was an unbearable affront. The sheer force of its presence threw her backward, slamming her against a wooden pew. Pain flared through her ribs, but she scrambled to her feet, her gaze fixed on the small dark opening. The scent of damp earth and blood was overpowering. Now, clinging to her clothes, filling her lungs. She could hear the heavy thud of footsteps behind her, closing in. Just as she reached the opening, a figure burst from the shadows within it. Not a townsparent, but a young man, perhaps in his late teens, his eyes wide with a desperate fear that mirrored her own. It was Thomas, a shy boy she'd briefly seen, working at McGregor's store, always quiet, always avoiding eye contact. He looked emaciated, terrified. "Go," he croaked, his voice raw with terror, pointing frantically deeper into the darkness of the passage. "There's another way. I'll hold them." Before Elara could process his words, Thomas lunged forward, not at the townspeople, but at the shriveled heart on the floor. With a choked cry, he snatched it up, his small act of defiance an unthinkable sacrilege in this place. The chanting stopped abruptly. A collective gasp rippled through the villagers, replaced by a guttural roar of pure rage. The shadowy entity recoiled, its form wavering, as if struck. Thomas didn't hesitate. With a primal, desperate scream, he plunged the withered heart into the small flickering flame of a single candle that had been burning on the altar. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The shriveled heart, dry as old parchment, ignited, with a furious, unnatural green flame that flared blindingly, illuminating the horror within the church. The townspeople shrieked, not in anger, but in agony, clutching their heads as if struck by an invisible force. The ancient symbols on the walls pulsed erratically, then began to blacken and crumble, like dried blood flaking off stone. The colossal shadow of the old one recoiled, writhing, its form dissolving into smoke and distorted screams that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Thomas screamed too, a final, guttural cry as the green flames engulfed his hand, then his arm, consuming him with terrifying speed. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding, for forgiveness, as his small act of sacrifice tore apart the very core of Oakhaven's dark power. Alara didn't wait. The sacrifice had created a momentary chaos, a brief window of opportunity. She plunged into the dark passage Thomas had indicated, the sounds of the townspeople's pained wails and the agonizing, dissolving shrieks of the entity fading behind her. The passage was narrow, damp, and smelled of earth and old fear. It twisted and turned, seeming to descend deep into the very heart of the mountain. She could hear distant, muffled sounds of panic from the church, and a new, unsettling sensation. The low thrumming of the earth, which had been constant, now felt fractured, dying like a massive engine sputtering to a halt. Alara ran, driven by pure instinct, her lungs burning, her ribs aching, but knowing that every second meant the difference between escape and becoming another forgotten soul in Oakhaven's chilling history. She didn't know where the tunnel led or if she was truly safe, but the memory of Thomas's desperate sacrifice and the terrifying vanishing presence of the Old One propelled her forward into the suffocating darkness, leaving behind the horrifying remnants of a town whose ancient, living evil had finally begun to crack. Alara scrambled through the narrow, twisting tunnel, the damp earth cold against her hands, the suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. Behind her, the screams. From the church faded, replaced by the unsettling silence of a power broken, a ritual interrupted. She didn't know where the passage led, but the desperate, dying screams of the Old One and the sudden, chilling silence of the townspeople told her one thing. Thomas's sacrifice had worked. He had truly disrupted their ancient, malevolent pact. Hours later, perhaps, or only minutes, time had lost all meaning in that suffocating darkness. She saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. With a renewed surge of adrenaline, she pushed forward, breaking out into the cool, night air. She was deep within the woods, far from the town, at the base of a jagged cliff face, where a narrow cave entrance, hidden by dense foliage, marked the end of the tunnel. Her body ached, her lungs burned, and every nerve ending screamed with residual terror. But she was out. She ran. Not a frantic, panicked sprint, but a steady, desperate jog, fueled by the primal urge to put as much distance as possible between herself and Oakhaven. The moon, a sliver of white, cast long, distorted shadows through the ancient trees, turning familiar shapes into monstrous specters. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like the pursuit of the townspeople, or worse, the reforming shadow of the Old One. She ran until her legs gave out, until her breath came in ragged gasps, until the familiar drone of tires on asphalt finally reached her ears, a faint promise of the world she had left behind. She collapsed by the side of the road, the sudden presence of a faded "Welcome to West Virginia" sign a stark, almost cruel reminder of normalcy. Her car, miraculously, was still where she had left it, parked a good mile from the general store, obscured by a bend in the road. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped them. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound of mechanical power, and she sped away, leaving the silent, watchful mountains of Oakhaven behind. The drive was a blur. She drove through the night, past gas stations she didn't dare stop at, past small towns whose lights seemed too bright, too normal. She didn't stop until the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, illuminating a roadside motel sign that read "Vacancy" in glowing neon. It felt like another lifetime since she had been in a place like this. Inside the sterile, brightly lit room, The horrors of Oakhaven began to crash over her. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, smudges of dirt on her face, leaves tangled in her hair, and eyes that held a haunted, faraway look. The peculiar earthy scent, mixed with something metallic, still clung to her clothes, to her skin, a persistent reminder of the ancient evil she had encountered. She tried to wash it off, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, but the smell, or perhaps just its memory, lingered. The image of Thomas, engulfed in green flames, sacrificing himself to break the pact, flashed in her mind, a raw, painful wound. His desperate courage, his small act of defiance against a powerful generational evil, was a stark contrast to the terror that had consumed her. He had paid the ultimate price, and she had escaped, carrying his silent scream with her. For weeks, the echoes of Oakhaven haunted Ilara. Sleep offered no solace, only vivid, terrifying nightmares of shadowy figures, guttural chanting, and the shriveled, symbolic heart. The low, thrumming, though no longer physical, resonated in her ears, a phantom vibration from deep within the earth. She tried to go back to her research, to her life, but the mundane now felt hollow, meaningless. How could she teach about forgotten communities when she had witnessed one that actively consumed its own, bound by an ancient, monstrous entity? The truth of Oakhaven was too terrifying, too unbelievable to share. She tried to report it to the authorities, mentioning the disappearances and the unusual nature of the town, but her story was met with polite skepticism, then thinly veiled dismissal. Just another case of mountain lore getting out of hand, a local sheriff had chuckled, oblivious to the profound evil she had narrowly escaped. Her university supervisor, too, suggested she take a sabbatical, citing stress from an intense research project. No one believed her. No one could. Ilara knew the secrets of Oakhaven would remain buried, protected by the mountains and the disbelief of the modern world. She considered publishing Silas Vance's journal, but the fragments of it she possessed without further context would be seen as the ramblings of a madwoman, a piece of macabre fiction, not horrifying reality. She had proof, yes, the journal itself, and the memory of the chilling, dark power. But the proof was too extraordinary, too fundamentally disruptive to the ordered world. It was a truth that existed outside the boundaries of logic and science, a truth that could only be believed through terror. She eventually left her academic career, the sterile environment of libraries and archives now feeling like a cage. She moved to a small, isolated cabin herself, ironically not unlike the one in Oakhaven, far from the city lights where the silence was often broken only by the wind. She spent her days walking the woods, listening, watching. She never spoke of Oakhaven, not to anyone. But every now and then she would notice a small, crudely carved wooden figurine placed subtly near her path, or she would catch a faint, peculiar, earthy scent on the breeze, even hundreds of miles away from West Virginia. And in the deepest quiet of the night, when the moon was hidden and the darkness was absolute, she would sometimes hear it, a low, ancient thrumming, pulsating from the earth itself, a chilling reminder that some horrors are never truly vanquished, merely contained. Oakhaven's echoes, she knew, would haunt her forever, a testament to the fact that deep within the forgotten corners of the world, ancient evils still lurked, waiting for the right moment and the right sacrifice to rise again. The mountain had its hunger, and even when it seemed sated, it never truly forgot, and neither would she.